Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Crowdfunding Inside Out, a podcast by LenderKit. And today we are starting the first episode, the pilot one, with Rotem Shneor, who doesn't really need an introduction because he has such a reputation in the world of research in crowdfunding. Nevertheless, Rotem, welcome to the podcast. And I guess it would be great to start with very beginning. How you actually came to this area and started researching crowdfunding.
Okay, thank you so much. Great to be with you, and good luck with this great podcast. I'm looking forward to listening to all episodes that will come soon. As for myself, I've been working with entrepreneurship for many years, been teaching it in different forums more or less since 2003. Seen a lot of good ideas, lots of brilliant entrepreneurs coming in and out, but very little businesses emerging or surviving. And when trying to identify some of the reasons for that, we saw that a big issue was access to finance and to investments. As we recognize this problem, and since most countries are not venture capital hubs or enjoy relative abundance of early stage and risk type of capital, then we started to look into alternatives. And at that time, and now we're talking about 2011, 2012, something like that, it began to be some noise around crowdfunding. And the more I learned about it and the more I read about it, the more I understood that this could be very interesting to work with and to dive deeper into. And we sort of enjoyed the first mover advantage in that respect. And at the time, there was a call by the Nordic Council, which is the regional integration body for the Nordic countries, that was called the High Growth Entrepreneurship Program. And they were looking for fresh ideas how to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the Nordic countries. And we came up with an idea of, okay, let's try to introduce and work with crowdfunding in the Nordic countries. And it fell on open-minded people and that were very interested in it. And eventually we got a very generous grant. We partnered with what was then very young platforms that just popped up around the Nordic countries, most of them less than a year old at the time, and created what was called the Nordic Crowdfunding Alliance. And that was basically step one. And from there, things sort of took off because anybody who was searching for information and wanted to learn a little bit about crowdfunding managed to come across what we were doing. And, for us, it's just been fun to work with something so interesting, so exciting, and that there was so much interest around. And things, one thing led to another, and today we have a full-scale crowdfunding research center and multiple researchers and involved in many projects and have great relationships with the industries and engage in a lot of educational programs and, of course, also with discussions and inputs to policymakers and regulators in different environments. So that's how it started, basically like any good entrepreneurial idea, from pain and from a need. And because we identified a painful point, we were able to sort of focus on it and hopefully contribute.
Very interesting. And were you involved in any of the platforms on operational level, or was it only looking at them from distance?
Well, for me, it was very important to have good relations with all platforms. So I didn't want my engagement with any specific platform to be viewed with suspicion by the other platforms. Because in a way, as a researcher, you want to collect data from all of them, and you want to collaborate with all of them, and you want to see how things are going on. So I haven't been deeply involved at the operational levels, but I have always said that anybody who wants my advice, I will give it openly and freely, any platform. So I've given many platforms advice, but I never married to any of them in that respect or committed to any of them individually. So the same advice I gave to one platform, I would give to another. Also, the industry needed, and probably still does need, some neutral elements that can build the bridges between the different players and stakeholders. And sometimes as a researcher or as an academic institution, it could be an opportunity in that respect, because you come with this credibility of research and knowledge creation and academic work, and at the same time you don't have, let's say, a vested interest in the success of one platform or another. You just want to see the concept work, or you just want to support the industry as a whole. So that's been my position so far, and I continue with it. I do play with some ideas of being involved with some platforms, but usually it's outside of Europe and more for mission-driven than finance-driven, to bring access to finance to developing contexts, or to where really people are struggling with access to finance, and where entrepreneurship is so vital for survival and economic development. So there I might be more, deeply involved in operations, but in Europe it's pretty much neutrality in that respect, and working with everybody with interest and love.
Okay, so as a researcher, you'd rather stay unbiased about the platforms you research.
Yes.
Okay, and speaking about collecting the data from the platforms, a lot of research basically is based on data analysis. But how do you go about collecting it when you do this research?
Well, this is a very difficult question that you're asking, because platforms are very careful about sharing data and information, and especially in this day and age of GDPR and extra sensitivities about what kind of data is shared with who and how. And in addition to it, because it's young companies and because they're not sure exactly how to do things, they also are a bit afraid of what can be found, so they are again a bit cautious in that respect. But this is where this neutrality and the long-term commitment and relationship building that comes into the picture, because as an academic, in a way, I don't need to be involved with industry players. I don't need to attend the industry events, and I don't need to do many of the things that I do anyway, because I enjoy them and because I think it's important. So through this signaling of long-term commitment, you build relationships with platforms that learn to trust you, and then to also share information with you, and to experiment with you, and run analysis with you. So we've done different types of analysis. I mean, of course, we collect basic data, both as part of the Cambridge survey, the survey that we are doing now in Europe, and the quarterly report we do in Europe, in Norway. But this is very basic, fundamental data. It's nothing deep, no deep dive. But in addition to it, we've done a lot of both. Sometimes we did independent scrapping and coding of data from platforms. Sometimes we collaborated with platforms that shared some of their data without infringing any GDPR limitations. Sometimes we collected data from users of platforms that were willing to help us with that, because there's only that much that you can learn from the database. In the database, you have what is coded and what is technically possible. But if you want to tap into people's psychology, perception, emotion, attitude, things like that, then you need to actually have direct contact with them and measure it in psychometric ways that are sometimes more complex to people than the simple answers of yes and no and things like that. So we have wide experience, and we look forward to even more experience with more platforms, with more collaborations, and really serving and studying all the stakeholders, not only the platforms, the fundraisers, the funders, the investors, and the regulators, and anybody involved in this business is of interest to us to study.
Okay, and could you share what kind of data you basically or parameters you normally research? Because I understand that when it comes to user behavior or success of campaigns and so forth, it's all the topics for the research. But do you research things like business model success, for example, whether one model is more successful than other, whether it's profitable and so forth? Are there research in that area?
We ourselves haven't studied that, but I definitely see a gap and an interest to do that. And it could be both relevant at the platform level to see what kind of services that platforms are offering are more or less profitable or evoke more or less positive responses, both from investors or backers and from the potential fundraisers. But it's also interesting to study it at the campaign level to see whether certain business models as presented or promoted by the fundraisers evoke better, better or worse reactions from potential backers and investors. We have not done that yet, but this is definitely something to look into and include in our long list of studies that we do. We do try to capture a little bit about it in our survey now to see what kind of different models platforms are operating under, and that could be somehow correlated with the performance, assuming we'll have enough observations to run such analysis. The type of data that we do have and analysis we have been doing is, I can divide it to three. One is basic platform level data for industry reports, periodic reports, so really different descriptive characteristics and conditions that platforms operate under, and with a little bit of, we try to see some correlations with it in the Cambridge reports to see what kind of environmental conditions lead to more success or higher volumes per capita in different crowdfunding contexts. That's one level of type of analysis at the macro level, but if to be honest, most of our interest is at the more micro level. So this either happens at the campaign level or at the individual level. At the campaign level, it's usually data that combines data taken from platforms, either scrapped or received from platforms, all sorts of indicators available on the website. To that, we add some human coding of different aspects of the campaign of, for example, how was it a logical appeal or emotional appeal, whether it was funny or not, used humor or not, all sorts of things that the computer finds very difficult to code, but human can. And so we combine these type of human codings with available data and run analysis at campaign levels mostly to predict success of campaigns. And let's say the largest part of what we do is surveys of stakeholders. And this is mostly on our end, we mostly have been surveying backers to understand what influences their investment or backing decisions. If it's equity, so investment. If it's reward and donation, then it's the backing. And here we use all sorts of theories and explanations and reasons and try to see what is correlating with intentionality and behavior in different conditions. But we also did it at the fundraiser level to see what makes people decide to use crowdfunding in their fundraising activities. And we do it for entrepreneurs. For example, we compare entrepreneurs in different contexts, and we compare immigrant and non-immigrant entrepreneurs, and to see whether immigrants try to improve their social network by doing this, because they are traditionally disadvantaged in accessing local networks and accessibility to local resources. We do it with, for example, in specific industries like the cultural and creative industry. And this is because, first of all, the cultural and creative industry was one of the first to adopt the whole concept of crowdfunding, into some of the first platforms were in this area, but at the same time, they're so lagging behind today when you compare to the other industries. So they have sort of stagnated, but have not continued to flourish. So we try to understand why this has happened. And also because of the unique aspects of it, that it's not only about commercial value or financial value creation, but creativity and about artistic expression and artistic value. And that is very difficult to quantify and but still drive and influence people's decision making. But like many other things, yes, there are particularities to certain sectors, but we see that many of the fundamentals go across. There's some unique aspects to different industries, but human behavior, the fundamentals of human behaviors are quite stable with a little bit of marginal changes when you play with the context. So that was a very long answer to a short question.
Yeah, it also drives a lot of new questions from me, so we'll probably not have time to cover all of them. But one of them, you mentioned cultural crowdfunding and artists and so forth. And also, I know you are doing a lot of stuff outside of Europe, which I think correlates with what you also mentioned before. Could you share something about what you saw in other countries and other parts of the world when it comes to crowdfunding? Do you see, maybe to make it a little bit more structured, do you see the potential there besides reward and donation-based crowdfunding in African countries, for example? What do you see happening in equity crowdfunding, for example, or debt there?
I believe there's a short-term perspective and a long-term perspective. So in the short-term perspective, I think the potential is very limited. And that is because regulations are not in place. Social trust is lacking in such environments compared to European levels of social trust. And it requires time for people to be convinced about the value of this. At the same time, I would say, because the need is so great, okay, when there's a need, then there's a will to try new things. And because everybody has access to mobile phones and to internet, and Africa is actually leading the world when it comes to mobile payments and mobile banking and mobile services in that respect. So in a way, the digital world compensates for a lot of infrastructural problems that exist in the offline world. So it is really about education and about exposure and about experience and about creating new trust facilitation mechanisms and risk management systems that are better fit for this type of context. And then once that is cracked, then I believe the commercial potential, when you think about it as a platform owner, then the commercial potential is much bigger in these environments than in other places, simply because of the scale. The need is so great. So the person that will crack this code, how to manage risk in such environments in a good way, will win, I think, a very big pot. Of course, Europe is a more stable, or the Western world is more stable, but at the same time, the need there, although felt, is not as great. So it's a nice experimentation, but in most cases, it's not a live or die type of questions, exist or cease to exist type of questions. So it's a different dynamic. Of course, there's still a lot of potential. Most people are not sufficiently aware, not sufficiently experienced in using these type of platforms and services. So the potential is still great also in Western environments, but where this would actually have potential to make real impact and to cause a change in the economy is in emerging and developing countries. But yeah, of course, the challenges are there.
Yeah, I can definitely support that there is a need and there is quite a big potential there, because at LenderKit we see quite a lot of people who want to start some sort of platforms in African countries, very different ones. And we don't see a lot of them actually starting them. So maybe many of them are at the idea stage. They're exploring how to do it. For sure, there should be some learning curve, but you are right. Hopefully, at long-term perspective, there will be quite a big potential.
The big hurdle is the trust and the risk management. I think lending could be, equity would really require education of people, like it requires in Europe, about why do you need to own shares in non-tradable companies and so on. But lending, people are already very familiar with. They use either all sorts of lending mechanisms, from microfinance to savings to traditional banks to the village gangster to get the loans. So it's nothing new. It's just to feel the safety in transferring this activity to digital level and to digital platforms. And I don't think it's such a long way, because they already have their bank accounts digitally. They already make bank transfers digitally on the mobile phone. So it requires some tweaking, but it's there. And I think it's waiting for that big investors that will be saying, okay, we are willing to go into a few years of tumultuous and crazy ride in experimenting with different types of models. And we will, in the beginning, we lose a lot of money. But once this stabilizes and achieves itself as some sort of standard and will take off, then the potential is fantastic and great.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let's hope we'll see how it grows.
Yeah.
Cool. So one other question which I have based on your previous answer, the long one, is have you already tried or thought about using large language models like ChatGPT in OpenAI for analyzing the campaigns, the text or the content of campaigns when it comes to determining or predicting the success of campaigns?
I haven't done so personally, but I hear about such efforts by others. So I know that there are people who are experimenting with this, and especially I've heard about this being used to evaluate and predict default in crowd lending. So to start and to analyze what kind of indicators can we collect to sort of predict higher chances of loan default based on information that goes beyond the crowdfunding platform or what is disclosed on the platform itself, from social media, from other digital footprints and so on, to involve maybe bigger data into it. Yes, the potential is definitely there. But at the same time, I would be very cautious about it because I think everybody, and academics to begin with, are skeptics to everything, but beyond the natural skepticism that comes with your hat as a researcher, we are really concerned about research integrity and that whatever we come up with is quality and trustworthy and credible, because that's where our whole that's our holy grail in terms of research. So as these systems improve, definitely it could be used to a greater extent than it is used today. But at this stage, we still don't know how to measure the credibility and the trustworthiness, the reliability of these type of analyses. And therefore, it's a bit more difficult to implement. It doesn't mean it won't. It doesn't mean it will not happen very soon. It's just that it's at that stage where there's a lot of uncertainties, but definitely as being a professor of entrepreneurship, I encourage anybody to play with any type of new technology all the time to find all sorts of exciting and new things.
Yeah, I agree that the technology definitely needs some fine tuning, and for sure it will improve. But I also think it will become quite standard way to analyze when it comes to reading large texts and then trying to summarize them or find some specific things there. And it's not something you can do probably without it, or you can do it, of course, manually and try to read all the campaigns and then try to find some parameters there. But AI in this case probably will do a bit better job, or at least faster, more efficient. I think it's a good thing to think about for the future in the research industry.
I mean, the problem is, I've seen all sorts of sentiment analysis and things like that going on. The problem is that the program is not that smart yet. It knows to identify a word or to identify a group of words together, but it's very difficult for them to refine the meaning. So sometimes you can say a word, or you can say a certain group of words together in a text, but not to actually mean that thing. So to start to quantify it and to measure it, or to copy paste it into different texts, and say this is what this meant is a problem. In a way, it is good for very technical, for very quantifiable, for very factual type of analysis. It's not so good when you want to interpret people's meanings, opinions, feelings, views, attitude to identify cynicism, to identify humor, to identify all sorts of things like that you sometimes, sometimes people use humor in a campaign. But if the machine will just read it, it will refine the technical specifications that will come up with it, will completely misrepresent or misinterpret the whole message of the campaign. So yes, for some things, yes, definitely in the future, but at this stage, not that smart yet. My personal opinion.
Okay, yeah, let's leave it at that and see where it comes in a few years. And
yeah, just a question of time.
Yeah, compare. Okay, let's get back to data collection and see European platforms. You mentioned a couple of times the report we are doing right now. I think it would be good to explain to anyone watching or listening what it is about. I'll give some, because it's a joint effort between us, I'll give short introduction from my end, and then if you could tell your side of the story, it would be great. So from my perspective, we at LenderKit and our sister brand Crowdspace, we've been doing technical industry, crowdfunding industry report for past 3 years. We were surveying European crowdfunding platforms, asking them a number of questions, and then we were publishing a nicely designed report with a lot of insights we were able to collect. And this year we partnered with Rotem and added some sort of academic approach to what we were doing previously. Rotem, I'll let you explain more your story, how you came to this venture, in a sense, and also why it is important to get this data collected now from European perspective.
Well, I think, for every industry that is trying to achieve legitimacy and to grow and to convince people about its viability and potential, it's always good to be armed with the proper information about the state of things and how they are developing. And that's important just for this discussion with every potential stakeholder. And also for us to be a bit more, self-critical about things are actually going, and where do we have challenges and where do we have problems that we need to address. So this is basically creating some sort of benchmark or some sort of fact sheet to aid anybody who's interested in this and just wants to know what's going on, what are the facts beyond the hoo-ha and the buzzwords of crowdfunding and how exciting it is. So that's one aspect to it. The other aspect of it is to also have this historical record so that we can show how things evolve through time and how they change for the better and for the worse. But things are dynamic. Things are not remaining in the same way. And we want to see how things are changing and try to trace also why they are changing. So that's another dimension to it, the longitudinal dimension. Finally, it also has an educational leg, because when we teach people about this, we have a course about crowdfunding, so I use a lot of these facts and figures when we teach, and when we introduce the conditions in different types of countries and markets and segments in terms of the different type of crowdfunding models, people need to understand the differences between them and how they work and what's the actual meaning in terms of practice for that. That is from our head and the average guy's interest in it. But from the platform's interest, this is very good market intelligence. If each platform will need to collect data from all of the platforms and to try to sum up the numbers and try to see where things are going and what's the general trend in the industry, then they will pay a consultant a lot of money to do it, or that they will need to invest a lot of their own time to do it. So this is a way to get relatively good information for market intelligence and to make your own strategic decisions at the business level, and without investing too much in it. And the final stakeholder, I would say, is the regulator and the policymaker, because the regulators are in this strange position that on the one hand, they don't want to regulate if this is not going anywhere. At the same time, they need to regulate because risks are being taken and stakeholders need to be protected from investors, backers, fundraisers, and so on. So in this tension between what is too much regulation, what is too little regulation, there is a need for information to decide that. And one way to get that information is to look into the macro level and what's happened. Not when one loan defaults or one company goes bankrupt or one platform misbehaves, but when seeing what's happening in general, what's going on with the industry at the total level, rather than sticking to these outlier or the noisemakers at the sides of things. So it's very important for regulation and policy making, and especially focusing now on Europe is this new implementation of the European crowdfunding service provider regime, because that sets a standard for all platforms that wish to operate with crowdfunding for business, either through equity or through business loans. And this should be implemented in a similar way across all countries, with the possibility to passport such licenses. And again, at the European level, there's an interest to see, first, to what extent is it actually being implemented? And at the other level is what does the industry think about this regulation? Is it something that hampers growth or facilitates growth, or strikes a good balance between the two? But without data, without information, we can't really answer any of these questions, and everything will be intuitions and opinions, but not factual. So we're trying to bring these facts to the table. And I will add by saying that we'll only be able to do it if platforms answer. So if any platform representative is actually listening to this, so please fill this survey, help us to help you in anything you do, from business intelligence to your dialogue with regulators, to the educational and training materials you prepare, to your marketing materials. All of this can be influenced by what comes up from our great survey. And thank you, Konstantin and LenderKit, for working with us on this great project.
Yeah, thank you for joining efforts. And I can only add that the survey is still open, like Rotem said, and we will post a link to the survey somewhere in the comments or somewhere along the video. I only have one last question to finish this and to wrap up. Based on what you see in Europe right now for the crowdfunding market, do you think it's still a good idea to start new crowdfunding platforms, or is it already enough as it is right now, and it's only a question of improving existing ones?
The answer depends on what you want to do. If you're willing to learn from other people's mistakes and sort of leapfrog other people's problems that they needed to address, then here's an opportunity for you. You didn't need to pay those type of tuition fees, and you can start and invest your money in different directions because things are sort of stable. But this, at the same time, means that in many countries, this is quite a competitive environment. So unless you can provide a very competitive model and at the same time unique value propositions, then I wouldn't recommend entering. At the same time, it's just the first days of this new regulation, pan-European regulation. So a lot of the activity is still at the national level. So if your ambition is to do an international or cross-border type of platforms, so this type of market and this type of niche is still quite wide open. And for those who will scale up quickly and will be able to develop an internationally performing platforms, I think the opportunity is there and in a better condition than ever before because of the new regulation that is in place. So you don't need to adjust yourself to every context separately to the same extent as before. I would also separate between the big countries and the small countries. So I would say in the big countries, the market is quite competitive and there's a lot of platforms in each niche that is sort of already quite competing with each other. But the small markets actually don't have that many players, both because the domestic market is small, but also because, without this international licensing and the scale of things, then it was not really very viable to operate. But now, with this opening, this type of activity is probably highly encouraged. So you can enjoy the new type of regulation, you can enjoy the technical developments that are already in place, you can enjoy the payment solutions that have already been created, and you can enjoy the greater or better awareness of people of the concept. At the same time, you do need to come up with a unique value proposition with some interesting new services or twist on the services that are being offered, and just excel at what the others are doing, and that's the way to carve out your own niche. So yes, there is potential, but not to do what we've already done before.
Sounds good. So on this positive note, thank you again for joining this podcast. Rotem, was really a nice conversation. And I hope this will be the start of more and more series and more episodes we can publish. So
good luck.
Thanks again, and bye-bye.